Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Liverpool Daily News. We're going to talk a bit more about Jude Bellingham as we did yesterday, but let's start by talking about a couple of potential alternatives for Liverpool. And it's been reported that there are a couple of kind of Serie A players who are of interest to the Reds. So we'll start with one that we actually faced in the Champions League. I distinctly remember him playing very well in the 4-1 win over Liverpool, although most Napoli players did on that night. Stanislav Lobotka. So what can you kind of tell us about him, and do you think he'd be a good fit for Liverpool?
Yeah, he's an interesting player. He's kind of been a talent for a while. Yeah, I think he came through at Nordsjælland. Obviously, it was the first real prospect to come through at Nordsjælland. Now we know them as a really good hotbed for youngsters. You know, they've had a history of good young players coming through there, but Lobotka was kind of the first. He's got on to play in Spain and then signed for Napoli. And in the beginning of his career, he couldn't really he wasn't as impressive. He couldn't really get off the mark at Napoli. He was in and out of the team. But this season, he's really stepped up and he's come on for Napoli and he's done really well. And I think he's probably been one of the best players in Serie A, if not in terms of one of the best holding midfielders in European football at the moment in terms of his form. But in terms of Liverpool, I mean, obviously, he fits the profile of what Liverpool are looking for. He controls the midfield. He's good defensively, intercepts play well. He's good at just breaking up attacks and he's really comfortable on the ball, very pressure resistant. But I think, as I said, in terms of Liverpool, just looking at his player profile, that's one thing. But obviously, we need to look at his age. He was born in 1994, so he's 28 now. I think he's going to be turning 29 later this year. That's not necessarily what Liverpool are looking for in terms of building for the future. So I think for that reason, I can't see Liverpool making a move for him. And on top of that, Napoli are going to have a lot of financial power. They're likely going to win Serie A this season, going to qualify for the Champions League. I mean, who knows how far they'll go this season in the Champions League. The draw has been quite favourable to them. So they could potentially knock out AC Milan and get in a Champions League semi-final, and then they're not that far away from a final. So in terms of their financial power as well, they can afford to ask a lot from Liverpool. And for a potentially 29-year-old, I don't think it makes sense for Liverpool to go for Lobotka, even though he's a talented midfielder and he does tick a lot of the boxes of what Liverpool are looking for. And then you mentioned Milinkovic-Savic as well. I think it's kind of a similar boat. In a different sense, he's a goal-scoring midfielder who Liverpool kind of also need at the moment. I think that's something that's been lacking from midfield for several seasons now, having someone who can contribute in the final third with goals and assists, and Milinkovic-Savic does that. But at the same time, I mean, I did an interview with one of his former coaches back in the day, and I'm sure he's changed a bit now, but he was telling me that he tried to hide behind trees when they were doing laps around the field. So I don't know how he fits into Jurgen Klopp's kind of gegenpressing, sort of playing style. And at the same time, like I mentioned with the age as well, he was born in 1995, so going to be 28 later on doesn't necessarily fit the profile of the young prospects Liverpool should be looking towards and building for the future, because in a couple of years' time, if Liverpool do go for him, then they'll be in the same boat, having to replace him for a younger player.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things to pick up on there. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this Napoli team. I mean, we've seen teams make a big splash in European competition for sort of a season and then get picked apart. But if Napoli, are kind of Champions League finalists, if they obviously, as they're looking like very likely to do, if they walk Serie A, are they going to be able to keep that team together? Obviously, Lobotka are only one of many kind of breakthrough players in there in that squad this season. And then you got Milinkovic-Savic, who is one of those who's been linked with a Premier League move for forever, really. Year after year, transfer window after transfer window. I think a lot of links with Manchester United specifically. And you've always wondered, is it actually ever going to happen? So maybe we'll see some movement on that. But I want to ask you about the age thing again, which you've mentioned there, because I think it's interesting. I remember there were links with João Palhinha from Fulham recently. He's obviously had a brilliant season, but again, I think he's 28. So again, there would be, I think, question marks about signing a player like that. I mean, as you see it, what's kind of the ideal age profile? Are we thinking about what we generally do with attackers, where we bring them in 24, 25, so they're not kind of very raw, but they're still kind of young enough that you're going to get kind of 5-6 years of kind of elite level service before you have to worry about them starting to decline?
I mean, ideally, I'd like 2 midfielders in this summer at least. Looking around, you have that experience. You have Henderson, Thiago, Fabinho, who are around 30 years of age. So I don't necessarily think Liverpool need experience. I think right now we need to build for the future. So I think, like you mentioned, someone in their prime would be my first midfield candidate. That could be even Bellingham potentially. I mean, it's not just age; it's based on experience. And Bellingham has played over 150 senior games now in his career, so it could be someone like Bellingham, but he's a unique case. So ideally, probably somewhere around 23, 24. Still has maybe a decade or so to give to Liverpool. And then the second option would be potentially someone even maybe a little bit younger, like a prospect. Ideally, I would like that to be the sort of holding midfielder, covering for Fabinho and pushing him on a little bit further, but not too young, around 2021. That kind of profile. And then, obviously there's the argument to be had, like, then is that going to cut the pathway for Bajcetic? But for me, Bajcetic is better in a number 8 position. So I don't necessarily see his long-term future being the holding midfielder for Liverpool anyway. So I think Liverpool still probably need that backup for Fabinho. I don't think Bajcetic solves that.
Yeah, well, obviously we've seen him used in both positions, and I mean, you mentioned kind of a 21-year-old player. I know Liverpool were quite strongly linked with João Gomez, who ended up going to Wolves. So he might have been one that they could have got, but there might be other opportunities out there. Let's talk about Bellingham then for the last few minutes or so. Obviously, it's what pretty much everyone in the fan base is discussing at the moment. In light of the report from David Ornstein yesterday, Liverpool are unlikely to sign Bellingham at the moment. If in terms of a scenario, Ben, if Liverpool have, say, 150 million to spend this summer, if they're really going to put a big transfer budget into it, do you think it would be wiser to sign Bellingham and then you leave yourself with, say 30 million left to do the rest of your business? Or should they sign multiple cheaper players, and would that actually have a bigger impact overall in terms of raising the ceiling of this Liverpool squad?
Yeah, I mean, I've been quietly in favour of the latter option for a while now. I mean, don't get me wrong, Bellingham is a fantastic player, and I think Liverpool have kind of shot themselves in the foot by the media frenzy around him and by claiming that, that was going to be their number one target that they were waiting for. But for me, just given how the season has gone on, FSG's financials, there's not going to be a new ownership around, and the budget is going to be quite tight. It's going to be stringent. And if that's the case, then I think, as talented as Bellingham is, I think there are players similar to him who are performing at a similar level, but they might not necessarily be England internationals, so therefore don't get as much hype, and who could do just as good of a job for Liverpool, if not better, and would cost maybe half the price. So I think I think I am definitely in favour of the latter option and going for multiple players and potentially even investing elsewhere in the squad, because let's be honest, it's probably not just the midfield that needs a couple of reinforcements this summer. I would like to see maybe a centre back come in as well, and obviously Roberto Firmino is departing, and I think there's a bit of a sort of, there is a need for a backup in the right wing position for me, because you can't expect Salah to go on forever playing all these games, all these minutes. Eventually, if you want to sustain him for a longer period of time, you will need someone to come in and take some of his minutes as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, obviously, on Salah. And I think I just agree with you, Ben, in that ultimately, I think if you're putting it specifically sort of like hard-headed, rational hat on, it's like it probably would be better to, to spend on multiple players. And because my problem with it is if you buy Bellingham and you're not putting the piece in place around him, then it's not going to have the effect that you think it's going to have. I mean, for all that he is a special player, he's not going to be able to change everything on his own. But the problem is, in terms of, working with this budget, Liverpool have obviously made these noises saying Bellingham is our top target. We're waiting for Bellingham. If you then kind of don't deliver him and you've kind of driven the fans into a frenzy, like you say, then you're going to obviously get that backlash. And you wonder as well if there's almost an element of, we can just keep fobbing the fans off saying, we'll get such and such next year and things like that. And it's almost a little bit disrespectful to supporters in some way to think they're just going to kind of forget that the promises that are being made or implicitly made. So, yeah, they've boxed themselves into a corner and we'll see how they try and maneuver a way out of it. But that'll do us, I think, for this morning's stream. Remember to check out all the written content that goes up on liverpool.com today and come back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for our next stream. But yeah, until then, enjoy the rest of your day.